So, today, I've got a lot of thoughts on my mind. Come here, girl. Come here. Sit. Good girl. She's a good girl. Let's go. Across the street. And I'm always trying to organize all of these thoughts, put them into one place. It's really hard because I have so much to think about, so much to say, and I just never know if what I have to say is really worthwhile. Like, will anybody actually care what I have to say? Am I just one of millions of other people, kind of just screaming into a void? And so I kind of wonder, but I don't know. I see a lot of people who write about this subject, but I don't see a lot of people who talk about it, and maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just not seeing the people who are talking about it, so maybe I'll be able to get in touch with people who are talking about this very sensitive subject that I have a feeling I will be talking about a lot, frequently, and over again as I navigate through this terrible thing that I have to deal with. And the thing that I was led to believe growing up, I absolutely loved psychology. I wanted to take psychology as soon as I heard it was a subject. I grew up at a time where internet was available, but certain subjects were just not. It's not that they weren't hidden behind paywall, it's just that the so-called infrastructure that made up, studying these subjects was not easily accessed. Sit. Good girl. And so, come on. And so I was always craving for these books. And then the books unfortunately were written in like academic style, so they were very hard to digest. It would be like trying to read something from Butler, like Judith Butler, right? Like, they tackle really complex topics that I want to learn about, but the problem is that their writing format is so difficult to understand. Leave it. Good girl. And so, off the yard. And so, what I had access to in psychology was so very limited, and I wanted more and more psychology information. And so when it was presented itself, I think I took Intro to Psychology, I want to say my sophomore year in high school. I'm really lucky that they had that available because I wanted to take regular psychology, and they said I was too young for that. I think psychology should be taught at a much younger level, and one of the biggest reasons I wanted to take psychology was to figure out what is wrong with me. And I learned some of the first things because of that, because psychology, the first things that they kind of teach you is about self-diagnosis, and self-diagnosis is not something they teach you how to do. Instead, they tell you, don't do it. I think some of the contributing factors is that I did do childhood counseling, and I absolutely loved my experience with that counselor because they did some very strange validations that I was not expecting, and I would almost go far to say that after 25 years of looking back on it, I would say, because I was probably like 10ish or something, or early teens, and I look back now and I go, maybe that was unprofessional, but I'm not sure. I wonder if I was in that position, if I would say the same things that my counselor said. But to ultimately summarize, they said, hey, I don't think there's anything wrong with you, and I would like your permission if it's okay. So he approached it very well. He said, but I would rather be doing therapy with your mother. I'd rather see if she would see me as a patient. And, at the time I fully understood that, he's heard everything that I've said already, and he decided that it wasn't me who needed the counseling, but it was somebody else in my life who did. And oh no, you're all tangled. Come here, baby. Come here. Good girl. Okay, let's go. And so, I had a very strong, good idea of what psychology was as a preteen. Learning in advance about how therapy, talking about your problems was really important. And that kind of brings me to the subject where I learned about narcissism and what At the time, I feel like it was called negative narcissistic behavior syndrome or something to that effect. I remember it having like a long, complex name, and it warned about the dark triad and, all the things that go with psychopathy and sociopaths and other narcissistic traits. And psychology has shaped a lot over the years, and it's always been very fascinating to me since I ended up majoring, in psychology and studying that so much. I took a class every year in psychology from high school into college, AP psychology, and took more psychology when I was in the military and going to school, so. How did you get so tangled? Come here. Is it the squirrels? Okay. And so I started learning about what ended up becoming, I guess you could say, my autistic focus, which was learning everything I could about narcissism. And I started coming up with my own thesis about how autistic people and narcissists are so opposite, and yet I think, and the autistic community will probably hate me for even suggesting this, but I think there's some sort of dynamic spectrum that they fall upon, where there seems to be a huge correlation, I'm just saying correlation, of autistic people who are usually born or under the influence of a narcissist. And this could be due to complex childhood trauma, CPTSD, or however you say it. All of these terms, there's constantly new terms, and I wish I was taking more psychology so I could stay up to date on these things. But basically, there seems to be this funnel where people who have similar autistic or childhood post-traumatic stress syndrome are raised by narcissists, and there's just a lot of correlation there, where I'm just noticing a lot of similarities, and I just kind of want to draw some contrast on it so that I can see these similarities, because it makes me wonder if a narcissist is like what happens when a person who is suffering from an allistic world, or the allistic world is not compassionate towards people who have different needs. To give an example, if a narcissist and a autistic person, especially if it's a familial relationship, say a narcissistic parent and an autistic child, they both share a commonality of mental traits. It could be increased agitated anxiety, it could be sensitivity to sounds or lights. They share those same things, but the difference is, and this is why I say it's like such an interesting spectrum, because it's almost like a dichotomy. The narcissist reacts differently than the autistic person. The autistic person shuts down. The autistic person goes into basically something worse than a depression. They go into a burnout, whereas the narcissist does something different. Instead of internalizing, taking it out on themselves, they take it out on everyone around them. And so I just noticed that there's this certain similarity between the two, about how they have certain needs and they're not being met, and how difficult it is for these needs to be met. And the major difference between them is what they do with those needs and when they're not met, because it's so difficult to handle when your plight is constantly being assaulted. For a person who has any kind of autistic traits, where there's more sensitivity to relationships, sensitivity to processing things such as food processing is probably a big one. There seems to be a lot of eating disorders with people who have autistic traits. Sometimes they're fun and interesting ones. Heel. Sit. Good girl. Pass the street now. And so some of those, kind of devolve into eating disorders, and some of them are fun and quirky, where we have safe foods. I watched a lot of people in my family have basically the same meal every day. For example, one summer I watched a family member have Dr. Pepper bean burrito, a frozen bean burrito, and an oatmeal cream pie. It's gonna be hard to hear me with the truck, hopefully not. But basically they had the same food, frozen bean burrito, Dr. Pepper, oatmeal cream pie for lunch every day for every summer pretty much. And that's the comfort food. And then the problem with having the comfort food is that sometimes the comfort food stops comforting. Sit. Good girl. And that really is hard for people to understand, because they'll be like, it's your favorite food, but it doesn't do it anymore. And that's really hard for people who are trying to be compassionate and understanding, because, you know, because of the difficulties. Come here, you got tangled. Come here. Come here. Give me your, there you go. Oh, no, now you're tangled worse. Give me your paw. Yeah, okay. And so it's really hard to deal with because, you know, people are usually trying to be compassionate and understand. You know, they've learned, if anybody has, you know, people who have on the spectrum, whether they're high functioning or low functioning, they know. And, you know, if you have loving family supporting members of your family, they learn what your favorites are. That should be normal, healthy of any family. But it's just kind of quirky and a little easier when you know they really like their food cooked a certain way. You know, they might be, I know some kids who their ramen is very sensitive. They soak the ramen or wash the ramen and they just throw the whole water out, and then they add the packet in later and they just have noodles with the packet. And that's the way they like it. And once you know that's the way they like it, it's not a big deal. You just make it the way they like it every time. And I think that's like a normal, healthy part of any part of relationships, family, or whatnot, especially when you're taking care of a person, maybe in a romantic way. You learn how they like their foods to be. You might like things saltier, so you'll make the entire dish with no salt, and then at the end you'll just salt your food. And that's because you're trying to make the food selection more palatable and easier for your, you know, significant other or a person that you're in a relationship with, have an easier time with eating the foods. And this comes back to my problem with narcissists, is that they know and they don't care. And that's the worst part, because they will deliberately, you know, sabotage these kind of things. I remember growing up, and I have a very bad sensitivity to like clusters of salt. The texture, all wrong. Triggers bad memories from when I had pneumonia as a little tiny kid, and so for me, it's very difficult for me to process the taste buds. I really struggle with that. And I had a sibling serve me dinner. They put 1 spoon of mashed potatoes down, and then they doused the mashed potatoes with salt, just, you know, let me have it, and then put the potatoes on top. And this is a really cute childhood prank, and there's no harm in the prank, and there's no bad will or anything towards them. But at the time, oh man, the betrayal, the sense of, you know, like, because as an autistic person, you're unable to process that. It's horrific. If you have food sensitivities, your whole meal is thrown off. You can't eat anymore. You're pretty much, your day is ruined. You just you need to detangle. You need to unwind. You need to decompress. And growing up with these autistic traits, which of course back then autism was a swear word, and it's really hard for people to understand like just how far as a society we've come, because using gay was a swear word, and using autism was basically, you know, condemning somebody to meaning that they are special ed, and if somebody needed special education, then they were just straight up the R slur. And it's funny that you know, I will deal with people who are only just a little bit more old than I am. You know, people in their 50s will be like, they have no problem saying that R word because they grew up with it. It's very hard for them to get rid of, and they don't realize just like how much harm our society has really grown. People are going to say that our society is soft. And I'm going to be like, no, we're a lot more aware of just how brutal we were. We don't need to be that brutal. And now that we actually understand these traits, it makes it easier for us to develop. And so I got to say that kids growing up who have autistic traits can now embrace it. And I'm really happy that kids can embrace this, because I wasn't allowed to. I kind of was in denial, but kind of not quite. I had a lot of people who treated me like I had autism, and the people who did it maliciously, the narcissists in my life, made me feel like I was a failure and made my life so much more difficult. A narcissist tries to control you, keep you down, and they want to have control over you, so they're never really wanting you to succeed. And this is going to be probably triggering for a lot of people who think about, if you have people in your life, relationships or family members, usually parents, who are doing the raising, where it feels like they question everything you do. They make you feel like whatever choice you make is bad, and you start to overanalyze the decisions that you make, and you start to, either develop anxiety or depression over what decision you're going to make, because it doesn't feel like no matter what you do, you're going to appease these people. And in the grand schemes of things, you're constantly wondering in the back of your head, like, why am I trying so hard to make this person happy when I have to make myself happy? The college that I choose, why am I so worried about making a parent happy about this college that I choose, when it's ultimately me going to this college, right? And a lot of these decisions that you make about whether you're going to stay in a particular school or subject or sport, your parents control these things, and if they're not loving and compassionate, like narcissists tend to be, then you're constantly second-guessing yourself, and this is destroying your sense of reality. They're constantly removing the virtue and the integrity of your own memories. And that comes to the hashtag word that people are expecting me to say, but I won't say it. If you know what it is, go ahead and comment what word I'm talking about, because I think that word needs to be approached a little bit more delicately. I don't think that people should just use that word willy-nilly. And maybe it's because I'm an old boomer now, and I remember back in my day when these psychological words had real depth and meaning to them. And I don't feel that this word means to just lie. I feel like the word really means to kind of usurp your integrity and your autonomy. And I think that's really important, because it needs to be separated from people in casual context start using this. Your friend group is not doing that to you. Becky did not do that to you. Usually it revolves around an actual, challenge, an indirect challenge to basically how you remember things, occurred. And so, tying that back in with my problem with being an autistic person and being around narcissists, is that I seem to be, for some reason, the undoing of narcissists. And I don't know why. Other people would tell me that this person's a narcissist, and I'd be like, huh, really? And I had no idea. And it's because while I was very easily manipulated and controlled by the narcissists in my life, when I met other narcissists, they struggled to control or manipulate me. And I want to say it's because, I'm just so used to... Come here, baby girl. Come here. We're not going to go near these cars. Come here. Let's cross the street here. Yeah. Alrighty. Sit. Sit. Look both ways. Alright. Let's cross the street here. Let's get away from these cars. Oh, slow down there, Nelly. Easy girl, easy girl. I know you're eager to cross the street too. I know. Alrighty, there you go. Good girl. Are you having a good walk? Oh, she's meeting a friend. And so, other people will tell me, oh, this person is a narcissist, and you're such a good girl. Yeah, look at that. And so, I would feel like, okay, I'm in a work position, whether this is coming from my military job, my engineering job, my corrections, working in food, you're going to come across people who have very inflated egos, and they act like narcissism is still a spectrum. There are people who have narcissistic traits, and I'm looking for and hoping for a way to describe when somebody has, unfortunately this sounds weird, a healthy amount of narcissism, an unhealthy amount of narcissism, and then going back to what I was raised, and maybe I'm just misremembering it, but there was this negative narcissistic personality disorder where the narcissism is controlling their life, and they're not really in control of their life. They're just narcissizing all the time, and they can't turn off the narcissism. And that's really scary for some people, because I feel like there's a terror in everybody who was raised by a narcissist, who is like saying, I was raised by a narcissist, and that means that on a biological level, they've probably passed these narcissistic tendencies through genes to me, right? Like my survival complexes coming in through my nature. And then there's the fear of, am I going to become a narcissist because of how I was raised? The narcissism raising the nurture bit of it, you know, what is these tendencies? And so if you've ever been raised by a narcissist, and you're worried about becoming a narcissist, hey, your feelings are valid. And the thing that I want to do is create some sort of method for people to keep themselves centered and keep themselves grounded from ever becoming the narcissist, because it's so scary to think that I watched people let that negative narcissistic personality disorder control their lives, and I watched people who had, unfortunately, sounds weird, kind of healthy and unhealthy narcissistic traits. And so I'll kind of go over the healthy narcissistic traits first, because I think people kind of need to hear that narcissism has a place in this world, a small place, not a big one, but a small one. Narcissism seems to be centered around self-survival, self-care, right? Because the story of Narcissus is that he looked into a pool and saw his beauty. I think this is a Greek tragedy? It's always the Greeks, right? I don't know, I'll have to fact check myself and look it up later. But Narcissus stared into a pool and he saw just how beautiful he was. And he couldn't stop staring into the pool, didn't eat, didn't sleep, and I think he ultimately falls into the pool and drowns. Yeah, and it's like a tale to warn people about like what the original narcissist means. We look at, I think it's the Latin word for mirror that we use, vanity, or a vein, right? It's to show, like, we use the same word to describe a vanity. When somebody has a dresser with a mirror attached to it, we call it a vanity. And it's so easy to forget that word means vain, and vain is self-centeredness, and used in a negative light. And the act of just looking in the mirror and seeing your own reflection or complexion in the mirror is considered vain. I don't think looking at yourself in the mirror is considered vain, but I think obsessing over it can be. And a lot of us are suffering from, sit, good girl, let's go. A lot of us are suffering from, say, things like body dysmorphia, where you do end up looking in the mirror, and this is where the healthy traits can turn into kind of unhealthy traits. Or you can start obsessing over things like looks. And I think that it's interesting to see that narcissism started off as being self-obsessed and look-focused and centered on shallow, skin-deep processes. And now narcissism has evolved into, let's see here. We have to cross the street, baby girl. Come here. Good sit. Let's cross the street. Come on. Good girl. You're so well-mannered. Alright. And so, I used to be focused on beauty standards and being in love with yourself, and now we associate narcissism with a whole new set of things that I kind of just want to go over what those things are, because a narcissist is no longer really described in that manner. I guess you could say there's a lot of ugly narcissists, or narcissists who aren't worried about their looks, or it stopped being about looks. It started going into control. And the narcissist personality used to have a place in society when we had things like chieftains, people who wanted to have total control over their people, and I think that it starts from a good place, but it quickly moves away from good place very, very fast, because it starts off with wanting to protect your people, wanting to keep all your people safe, and needing that control to maintain that protection. And the problem is that it has no place in society nowadays. We don't have chieftains. Maybe we have presidents, but I'll keep this non-political. And so, unfortunately, a lot of these traits no longer have a place in society. A good example of that is to all the people who are struggling, suffering, or living with anxiety, or anxiety is struggling and living with you. Leave the squirrel alone. Leave it. Leave it. Leave it. Focus. Nope, she's in squirrel mode. I'm sorry that you're experiencing all the anxiety. You would have been a very useful person in those old... Down. You would have been very useful in those old societies where we needed somebody to stay awake, safeguard things, fear the enemy, search for spies. All of those traits that keep you safe, your anxiety did those things, and they were useful, and that's why we passed our genes along, right? And so just remember that it's really not your fault that society is shaped this way, and that biologically we pass down these anxiety-like genes to you. It's because that anxiety kept us safe, and it kept our gene pool reproducing. And so it had its use once upon a time. And now society has changed where, unfortunately, anxiety has less use and it has more detriment in our life. It doesn't make it bad or wrong, it just makes some things less helpful than other things. And that's why I think that maybe once upon a time, narcissism had a place in society, and not the obsessed with your looks thing, although that seemed to be a guiding principle for a lot of gene passing on. But that leads into complex problems where society is kind of ruining with our own survival. Because society was basically saying, hey, in order for you to survive, you're an item, you're chattel, you are an object, and you've been objectified to reflect that. And so if you were a, say, woman in the early, centuries of history, and you basically bought into this objectification, then you had a little bit of narcissism, then you obsessed over your looks, and you were safeguarding your gene pool by passing on, by ensuring that you married... Sit. Good girl. You ensured that you passed on your gene pool this way, and I don't mean any disrespect in that regards. You did what you had to do to survive. And still to this day, people are focused on whether they're good, bad, ugly, or otherwise. And that's where I think that narcissism, maybe at one point in time, maybe had some good benefits, but it ultimately had more detrimental ones. And it has, unfortunately, a lot of problems in modern society. I think that to be a good leader, you need to have some sort of healthy dose of that in you, where you need to be thinking about wanting to have control over the dynamics of how things run. And I see that a lot in new leaders who are forming new businesses and new companies, and in my experience, due to how society and capitalism has shaped things, that it usually ends up in the negative anyways. And so we hold on to this mentality that it's totally normal for boss man to be a narcissist because he has to be, because he's protecting every asset of the company and he needs control of everything, and it leads to negative outcomes. I watched a particular person who hated their previous bosses, watched their companies tank no matter what they did to keep these companies afloat, make their own company, and all of the negative talk that they had about other people doing those things, how they did those things, and how they were narcissists, and then watch that person become the monster that they claimed everyone else was within a series of a few years. Stop pulling. Hey, what is that? What is that? What are you pulling for? Sit. Good girl. Alrighty. Go right back into... Hey, no! Get out of their yard. Come here. Focus. Focus. We're doing so good. Come on. Come on. And so, Sit. Look both ways. All right. And so, it seems that, and to kind of summarize back to where all my thoughts and put my train back on tracks, is that maybe once upon a time there was good things with it. There's probably not at all anymore. And I kind of think that I'm covering the history of where narcissism and like my experiences come from, my lore with, and my experiences about how my definitions are shaped and why my definitions are shaped the why they're shaped the way that they are. Because unfortunately I have a lot of experience with narcissists. And getting back to where people would tell me that I was kind of like thwarting a narcissist, autistic people don't seem to see the hierarchy structures. When we go to a job and we see a boss man and we see a supervisor and we see, a whole chain of command and whatnot, we basically go, okay, yeah, but they're just people, and I'm not going to grovel to this person. All right, we're going to cross the street here. Sit. Good girl. You're so good. Yes, you are. You're a good girl. And so, they treat all of them the same. And I remember, much to my chagrin, in the military, where it was very interesting to see a drill sergeant as somebody who was bigger than or more important than anyone else. I kind of had this sense of equality and justice in my head that the drill sergeant is just a dude, and they're fallible, and their decisions are capable of being questioned. And as you can see, that doesn't really mix well with the military, right? I had to really force myself to adopt that personality, and this is where we come to the problem of masking, or why it's so difficult for a person who is autistic to survive in a world, and why they have similar traits to CPTSD, because they put on a mask. So I put on my private, my rank, my insignia, my soldier mask, just thump, put on the mask, and now I am soldier. And now that I'm soldier, I see the hierarchy, I follow the structures to a T, I question nothing, I obey all my orders, I do what I'm supposed to, right? And this soldier mask, it evolves over time to, specialist mask, it evolves into sergeant mask, and I'm kind of sad I never hit the rank of corporal, but oh well, I wanted that corporal spot. But anyways, so sergeant mask, and that helps me see the hierarchies, and it makes me wonder if these people who are drill sergeants also have to hold these positions. They're also narcissists in kind of disguise, covert or whatnot. And I think that if we look at the criteria, we can make some pretty good positive guesses. We can make some educated guesses looking at criterion, like drill sergeants have the highest DUI rates of all the military. Drill sergeants have the highest spouse abuse, or end up having the highest alcoholism problems. Drill sergeant, drill sergeant, drill sergeant. All of the negative stuff, bam. And I watched my drill sergeant get hung up on a DUI and then become XO. So it almost seems like they rewarded his negative behavior. Yeah, power to that guy. Really liked his personality. And I think that they might have seen something different in me, because I had no problem talking smack with my drill sergeants. I would, run at his pace, then outrun him and tell him that the energy drink he was drinking was slowing him down. And for some reason, he really got a kick out of that, and it really helped, develop rapport with them. It's strange to think that one of the best places I had was when I was in the military. I really felt like I belonged the most, and I think it's because I mashed so darn hard with my with my autism. I really put myself into the role, and then people would see me outside of those roles, and they'd be like, "Huh? You're like a different person," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm in work mode or what. And I kind of learned this work mode from other family members, particularly like parental figures, where they would, be accused of, when they're at work, they think about work, and nothing but work. And when they're home, they think about family, nothing else. They don't want to think about work. And I was kind of raised that was normal. And I think other people struggle with that because they have family members who can't put work down when they're at home. And I have seen so many coworkers who can't put family down when they're at work. And I think that there's a normal amount of mixture in between all these things. Whether they're successful or not has no indicators on what is, anthropologically speaking, normal or common. And I'll use anthropological examples a lot when I talk, because I like to see things in I got these little autistic folders in my brain where I kind of hold what are expectations of society, because I don't normally see these same expectations of society, and I have to kind of jot these down so that I act like a quote-unquote normal or common person in society. I have to go, oh no, you're supposed to take your hat off when you go into a building because that's the expectations. Never questioning, where does this expectation come from? I don't really understand it, but I just have to go, okay, I have to follow it. And I went to, say a school or military where taking your hat off was so important, it was worth yelling and screaming at you until they were blue in the face, and you're just going, yeah, but I wore a hat. I don't understand why it's worth getting yelled at over a piece of cloth. And that's just like how the understanding works with an autistic person, is they really challenge and question silly or dumb rules. I guess we have a strange sense of justice where I was kind of holding on to these ideological fallacies ahead of time before even knowing about philosophy, thinking to myself that this is kind of an appeal to, tradition. And just because we've always done something this way doesn't mean that we should continue to do it this way. And even more importantly, I'm constantly reading about history, about how we make improvements to society, and then I'm told, no, we can't do something differently because this is how we've always done it. And it makes me go, what? Why? Like, all these inventors and all these, Renaissance happen, and people, hit these industrial revolutions, and we do things differently. So why are we doing things differently? Why are we still adhering to this silly rule of taking your hat off at the table? And I'll keep it interesting, hopefully, and go off on a tangent and be like, well, later on I found out that knights were asked to take their helmets off, their visors off, or their hats and helms off before entering into a eating area. The kings would often hold not quite banquets, but they would feed all of their staff. Everybody would kind of eat mutually, and this was supposed to be a reduction in poison, I believe. Like, the mentality was that, like, if you poison a dish, then you're killing everybody, and it's indiscriminate, and so it would prevent people from doing things against others. But on a more serious note is that, if a knight had his helm on, it meant business. He was going into combat, he was going into war, and you don't do that when you enter at a king's table. You go in unarmed, so you've got to take that helm off. And if you don't take that helm off, then you mean bad business, business of misery and possibly taking up arms against the king. And so these rules were created, like elbows off the table, because the serving places were made so that they were on two little spokes, and if you put your elbows on the table, you would knock the dishes over. And then these things evolved, and they kind of de-evolved to these strange traditions where we still hold today, where it's rude to have your hat on when you enter in a particular place. So if you enter in a church, then it's considered rude because it means you're still warring. And a lot of men associate hats with that physical nature, that physicality, that they're in a sport. And so that's the modern day form of warriorism. And it's the only way they can express their athleticism or whatnot. And so it's still considered rude in society, and it makes absolutely no sense to an autistic person, where we're just like, why do we do this still? This makes no sense. If somebody wants to wear a hat, just let them wear their darn hat. Especially with, if they're trying to conceal, say, balding, or keep their hair intact, or whatever piece they have, just let people just wear their hats if they want to. And I hate how I adopted this this mode, this mask, so to speak, where I intrinsically hated people who were wearing their hats on. And I apologize to anybody who I was rude to, like, insinuating that you are not a member of society proper if you're wearing your hat indoors. It's like I adopted this mentality, and gotta keep myself sane, centered, and focused to make sure that because I have this predisposition, clearly I have the genes in the family that have these narcissistic traits, and I was raised in that nurturing aspect. I don't ever want to become like that. And so I think integrity is really important, where you admit these flaws, admit these problems, and I try to make sure that the control that you're seeking is temporary, that is not permanent, that they don't overtake your desires and you become a slave to your narcissism. You end up staring into the pool until you fall in. And that's what I see a lot of narcissists basically doing. And so they basically doom whatever it is that they touch because they need so much control, they choke the life out of it. And so when I had managers who were narcissists, I resisted their control naturally because, as I've explained, I kind of see, I don't see the hierarchy system. I treat everybody like they're just a normal person, and I try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to say. So I'm constantly making sure that the quiet person is asked, like, hey, do you have anything to add to this? Making sure that people feel welcomed in conversations, because I don't want to be in a position where nobody cares about what I think. And I'm constantly worried, is everybody getting a chance to speak? Whereas in these situations, usually a narcissist or the manager or whatever the chief is doing is basically in charge, making decisions, and not really consulting other people about their expertise. And when I was a sergeant, I learned along the way about how to run things by watching all the people who run things the wrong way. I was constantly moved from team to team and squad to squad, and I took it very personally at first because I was like, is nobody like me? And I found out later that I was being drafted, and that people who owed each other favors were arguing over who got to have me because I was a squint. And if you're not familiar with military lingo, it means I did paperwork really well. I wore glasses, and in the military I had a very shaved head, so I looked like an egghead, and I got paperwork done. And so every high-ranking sergeant was like, yeah, I want this person on my team, on my squad, because they're going to do my paperwork and ultimately make me look good. And I was doing paperwork for them to the best of my ability, which isn't that hard in the military. Just, I swear, the literacy rate in the military is just crazy. Like, people are just barely passing. And so I was doing all of the paperwork for them and making them look good, and then they would get either promoted or something would happen where another person would be like, yeah, I want this person on my team so that they can help me with my paperwork. And so once I found out that was happening, towards the end of my specialist bit, so I had been in there for about 4 years before finally realizing this, I moved into doing cadre work, where I was in charge of setting up and developing the training for the soldiers. So basically we would have a bunch of white space, and they would say, hey, we need to make these soldiers be training non-stop, and we don't have any material for them. And so they would just look at me, you know how to do training? And I'd be like, yeah. And they'd be like, get to it. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And I'd get a class going. And part of me has always wanted to be a teacher, and teaching has always been something that I've always longed to do, is helping people. I love knowledge. I love the thirst for knowledge. As a pagan, I worship Thoth, and the search and the quest for knowledge has always been very important to me. But also teaching has always been very important to me. I loved so many of my teachers who just got me when I was growing up, where I had teachers that just really made a difference. I'm sure all of you have had bad teachers, but you guys probably had really good teachers too, I hope. And I had some really good teachers that really shaped me in the learning career, where I had great relationships with them, and I was like, hey, this is the kind of thing that I want to pass on to other kids. I want to pass this on to other people. And so when I was in the Army and I was training soldiers, I was in a teaching position, and I did this in a lot of my other jobs as well. And that was probably the most fulfilling parts of my careers, is when I was training, teaching basically. And so while I was teaching these soldiers, and a lot of the times I had to make up a class on the fly and then write up the paperwork, say what we did, how many soldiers attended, have everybody sign it, and then send it up the chain of command. And it looked good on paper because I made it look good on paper. And the classes that I did, everybody loved, and it elevated me to a point where I went to Sergeant Academy, went to WLC in Wisconsin, and that was where they really said, like, hey, and they noticed right off the bat, those sergeants there, they knew right off the bat that there's something off about me. You know, they would call me queer, they would call me autistic, and, you know, use all those phrases, but nobody argued with my ability to, you know, work as far as that goes. Handling the paperwork and, you know, making the classes, everybody wanted me on their team. When it came to volunteering, I volunteered first every time. I learned really quickly that the grading curve, I kind of like figured this out early, was that the grading curve was based on, you know, the first person who goes is usually quote unquote going to be the worst. And so you kind of get this like fail safe. If you volunteer and you go first, then you're guaranteed to succeed, because they don't have anything to grade you off of. So if somebody goes after me and does worse, they can fail that person. But I went first, and these people really struggle with being objective when deciding what is or isn't good or bad training, right? So I always volunteered first, to the point where they said, hey, you're constantly volunteering first, you gotta stop. So anyways, after passing the warrior leadership course with flying colors, I had some other people in my unit, you know, they all came back with all those points, and the claw selected me after completing my packet, moved me into sergeant. And so I really got to cement what I was doing in my unit, because they put me in charge of just so many darn things. Urine analysis, they put me in charge of DARNs, duty attention retention, NCOs. They gave me so many things until I couldn't handle them, and then they were like, oh shoot, we gave you too much stuff. And then they were like, hey, this is where you learn how to succeed. And all this ties into what I'm talking about, I promise. I have all these thoughts in my head, and I'm just, they're just like swishing around. And so that's where I learned how to leave the squirrel, it's okay, leave it. And so all this taught me how to run kind of a business. Once you get up to the higher levels of the military, bureaucracy kind of kicks in, and money becomes interesting, where you're choosing how funds are diverted. And I watched firsthand how these funds were being used, you know, to basically control what we were doing with our funds. And our funds went to good things, you know, when good people were in charge of it, and it went to bad things all the time too, but that happens. You know, we had to make sure that everybody got fed, and we had to make sure everyone got transported to where they were going, and we were constantly looking for lodging. So a lot of soldiers were coming and going from different places. We had to make sure everybody had a place to sleep at night. And so a lot of our budget was just tied up between that, but the other bits of the money was used for improvements, which were always great. So depending on what we needed, you know, what was in the budget, and every now and then we would get things that we wanted, you know, and different people wanted different things for that budget. Some people wanted the new fancy guns, and I don't blame them, because, you know, this is the military and that's what they like to use. So, you know, they want to spend $1,000 on a breaching shotgun with a special doorknob remover. That's great. Those gadgets makes those people happy. That's silly, but that's what they like. And so I got to learn firsthand, okay, I have too many things to control and to be in charge of, because they gave me and appointed me in charge of all these things, and I want to run them correctly. What do I do? And I had really good NCOs who were much higher levels than me, had been in for, you know, 10 plus years than me, and their advice was often, in order for me to get promoted, I got to make sure that you know what you're doing, because when I get promoted, you need to take my spot. And so what you need to start doing is, you can't just have, you know, you can't just be my squire, my Padawan. I swear they use Star Wars references way too much. They would say, you need to have your own apprentice, who will take your spot when you leave. And if you're, if you do too much and nobody can take your spot, then you need to train multiple people to do your stuff. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And so I was given my own team, my own squad, and eventually the rear det handle entire platoons. And what I learned was, okay, I want to start picking people who I think can handle doing these jobs, and I want to groom them into doing a good job. And that's using groom as a good word. I know that word has been turned into a bad word, but that's a darn shame. And so I would watch these narcissists who would get in charge of things, and they wanted total control, and I swear they had no idea about how to pick and choose soldiers for tasks. And I was constantly questioning the decisions that these people were making. I'd be like, well, why did you have this person go do that detail? They're terrible at that detail. And a lot of times I would get this narcissistic response of just like, yeah, I know. And I want to see them fail. And I'm just like, what? Why? That makes everybody look bad. That hurts that person. Like, I don't understand how you're okay with this idea. And it really hurt me. And so I would see people have this thought process where they're just like, oh, I didn't know they were good or bad at it. And I'm like, do you not know your soldiers? And that got me questioning, like, they didn't do, introduction reviews on these guys. They didn't do initial counselings and get to know these soldiers, find out their family status, find out their strengths and weaknesses, their pursuits and whatnot. I always did those things because the sample was set for me. The example was set for me that I had these sergeants who were sitting me down and going, what makes you tick, soldier? They wanted to know, what video games do I play? What, activities do I do? How's my family life? What's my jobs? What are my, my career options, my choices, all that stuff, right? Never ended with these people. And so I learned from the get-go that, okay, well, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I want to get to know all my soldiers and know what they're good at. And because of that, I ended up shaping my squad and my team into this fit fighting machine. When one of my soldiers was failing PT, I was calling his butt up and figuring out what we could do to get him passing PT. And it meant me going over to his house and working out. That's what I did. And he would come over and work out, and before you know it, he's passing his PT. And it's just because I just, I just gave a damn. And I wanted to see them all do really well. And that was the goal, was I want to see people do well. And I keep coming back to this problem with my narcissistic counterparts, where I swear, they don't want you to succeed. They don't want you to do well. They want you to fail. In fact, they like when they have control over you, and they want to keep you in a position where they constantly have control over you. And so I watch these narcissists in these businesses and how they handle problems, and it's like, I gotta ask myself, like, I feel like you're punishing people for their decisions, and I don't feel like you actually really want them to succeed. Sit. Good girl. And that worries me, because it's like you're expected to run a business. You're expected to run the business and control every aspect of it. But it seems like you're not even really qualified to do that if you can't figure out what people are good at, and if you just, get angry at them when they want help and resources. I had soldiers who would come to me for help, and I would be like, okay, have you ever done this before? No? And I'm like, well, what style of learning do you have? Do you want hands-on? And a lot of soldiers, have that mindset where they're like, yeah, hands-on, sergeant, hands-on. I'm like, yeah, cool. Do you want to watch me do it first? And a lot of them would be like, yeah, I would. If they want to see an example where, hey, you know what, if they're struggling with something, I'm going to do it first with them. We're going to sit down, we're going to do it together, and then I'm going to come back and be like, all right, well, now I'm going to watch you do it, and I'm just going to stand back and I'm going to watch, and I'm going to intervene if I need to. And if you say, oh, I got this, then I'm stand back and I'm going to let you get it. And this is why my unit became such a lean fighting machine, where we went to the bottom of the rung for how the Army, considered where we were and how we kept climbing to the top because we were passing everything. All of our numbers kept getting better. Our paperwork was getting tighter. Everything was getting turned in faster and better. And so when it came time for me to work in different jobs, I worked in engineering. When I first showed up, I'd been like, what is going on? Like, people would tell me it takes 7 weeks to get something done. I'd be like, okay, 7 weeks, cool, hold you to it. And then they would need more, they would need 9. And I'd be like, okay, well, what happened? And I would come down and be like, well, you know what? How about you teach me how to do it? and a lot of them wouldn't want me to learn, and that was usually a dead giveaway that I was being lied to. Right? I'd be like, okay, well, if you don't want to teach me, I will figure it out on my own, which has been some of the hardest things that I've had to do. I studied and learned basically electrical engineering. I learned how to solder without any real help for the longest time. You know, it took years of soldering and surface mount adhesion to kind of like, you know, get to where I was. And all of this because I needed to test things in, you know, complicated ways, you know, measuring heat, measuring light, measuring wavelengths, measuring electricity, you know, the volts or the amps or whatever it was. And I would realize that a lot of these people were just faking the funk. You know, it doesn't take 7 to 9 weeks to get something done. I would get it done in a week. And there was huge turnarounds, so when I became in charge of different departments, I would fix things in these departments. I was like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how it works. You're either gonna help me learn how it works, or I'm gonna figure it out. One way or the other, we're gonna get to the bottom of this. And I would find that people, you know, as soon as I was on their team and on their side, they would be like, okay, now I know you're gonna support me, and then all of a sudden work would increase, production would increase. Deadlines were no longer a problem because we were meeting all of the deadlines. And it's like, you know, isn't that crazy how when you put somebody in that position, before there was a narcissist who didn't care about you, didn't care how you got it done, all they really cared about was the money that they were getting, all they really cared about was themselves. And then you put a person who is autistic, who may or may not have, I just tend to make an oversight here, but a lot of autistic people tend to have this perception where they have strong sense of justice, where they really want everything to be equal. So they have a tendency towards wanting everyone to succeed. And I want everyone to succeed. I wanted to see all these guys, you know, meet their performance reviews and get promotions, meet their, you know, all of their goals so that they could get their raises. And over time I started turning this team, you know, in engineering into a lean, mean engineering team where when I had a new issue come up, I'd be like, hey, I got this problem. And they were like, yeah, let's get this. I got this. They show up. They want to be there. They want to help. They want to tackle it on their own, which is even greater when I get to see these guys who either, you know, some of the seniors who are taking charge again, and they're proud of their work. They're showing up and they're owning it. And you're going to get that squirrel. You leave that squirrel alone. They're faster than you. I know. She can't hear me when I'm talking to her. She just sees and hears squirrel. Doesn't hear a thing. Come on. No, get off the tree. Come on. I know you just want to play with them. Come on. And so, at work, these narcissists would try to control me, and I don't see them as controlling, and I would confront their controlling, which is where people would say, oh, you're very polaric. You're very polarizing. You either get along really well with people or you don't. And I was always like, that's really weird, because I'm a people pleaser and I'm trying to get along with these people. And then they would tell me, you know, insert the random narcissist that I'm not getting along with. And I'd be like, well, yeah, but they do this and this and this. And I come from a background in military and corrections where you document everything. So I have no problem documenting everything. I'd be like, here's emails, here's text messages, here's documentation of things said, things done, etc. And this would infuriate management because management doesn't really want to solve the problem. They want the problem to go away. And this is my problem with corporate and being in executive functioning positions, because executives, they just, you know, all they care about is either shareholders or the bottom line, the margins, and they don't really care about the people. Care less about the people. In fact, if you cause problems or headaches, then they don't care how good you are, they will just get rid of you. And I watched that time and time again in executive positions where I would make a very lean, hard, working fighting machine, and then they would literally fire all of those people and lay them off. They would lay all of them off, give them severance, and say, yeah, sorry. And then they would outsource that to China. Nothing against China. Just really hurts when you, you know, build up a team of people who are hardworking and watch them all get fired. Devastating. Or let go. And a lot of them still keep in contact with me, which is another thing that, you know, is really sad to see them, you know, make improvements and get on with their lives, but that's just how things work, right? In this horrible capitalist society. So there's a lot of problems that need addressing between how did you get all tired out? I think I walked her too long. I think I need to carry you home. I've been talking for an hour. Come on, let's go home. Let's go home. I got carried away and just talking nonstop about my opinions on society, narcissism, autism, and capitalism, but I'll keep coming back to these points. If anybody can even stand or tolerate listening to me rant about these things, then, I'll keep going. I doubt anyone cares, but that's okay. I want to continue tying in the difficulties of dealing with a narcissist and how autistic people seem to kind of usurp and undermine a narcissist because they're constantly trying to play these games where they pit people against you. They try to pit you against other people, and they will attempt to pit you against other people, and they will be confused when you don't want to, or you don't buy into it. You're just like, but why would I do that? And it works for so many other people, and it's very strange that, in my experience, holistic people have no problem being the flying monkey. Flying monkey, big narcissist vocab word. It's where you are basically the messenger. You are the delivery system. So you're the bullet. You are how they are going to do the manipulation. And what happens is in families, they will whisper things to their little flying monkeys, and their flying monkeys will whisper back, And so they'll ask you, hey, what's your sibling doing? When's the last time your sibling did this? And they're gathering information. And if you are buying into it, you don't realize that you're pitting your siblings against each other. And having experienced this firsthand and watching it in other people's lives and reading nonstop Raised by Narcissists on Reddit and dealing with all of these life situations and helping people find community where they needed to learn what was happening, because narcissists kind of have this playbook. And once you learn the narcissistic playbook, your life, if you're living with a narcissist, will get so much better and worse. Because, one, your life will get better because your feelings will be validated, and you will chase the squirrel. No, you will not chase the squirrel. No, you will not. Come on. No more chasing squirrel. Leave them alone. And it'll also get slightly worse. One, as I was going back to the good stuff, the validation parts of the feelings is huge, because now you know you're not crazy. You're not, your integrity is intact. How you remember things happened. You're, basically you're feeling more and more valid. And then you develop this best part, which is the attack plan, or how you're going to handle and deal with them. And when you have that attack plan, it changes a lot of things, where you go, well, you know what? I know they're going to criticize me one way or the other. Whichever decision I make, they'll hate both decisions. And so you just learn to go, I have to live with me. Back to the thing where I said about which college I choose. Why is it such a big deal when it's me who's going to be going to this college? Then you learn, well, you know what? They don't like either decision I make. Better make the best decision for me. And so it has those good sides, but then it has the bad sides where, all right, sit, baby girl. Come here, sit. Sit. Good girl. And so now they know that you're no longer easily manipulated, and they're going to get frustrated when they can't manipulate you, and it's going to cause problems because you're basically confronting a bully when you read the narcissistic playbook, because now the bully is going to want to control you, and you're not down for that, or you're picking and choosing what you're okay with and not okay with, and power to you for doing those things. It's your life, you make those decisions. And I want to say, if you have read the narcissistic playbook, I'm proud of you. And if you are dealing with a narcissist, then I want to form a community where we can talk about these things and where we can find, feelings of validation. And if you are terrified of becoming a narcissist because of the nature and the nurture of being raised by them, then you want to keep yourself accountable, then this is the place where I want to create where we can do that. And so the hard part of learning this narcissistic playbook, it's got its pros and its cons. You win some, you lose some. And so when you're dealing with them in businesses or at home, there's all kinds of different complexities where what I've learned as an autistic person is that I seem to be kind of immune to the controlling aspect. I instantly see it as, no, this triggers my unfair justice equality kind of trait in my autism. And there's a lot of different autistic traits. I think I'd absolutely love to go over them sometime, you know. I started telling my friends, you know, my friend has train autism, which makes him one of my best buddies ever, because I can always count on this guy to be mathematical, logical, sound, on time. He's just amazing that way, and I love him for that. And you know, I've got I call them odd autistics, the ADHD autistics, where they want new novel stimuli things, but they also want structure, and they can't decide between, you know, the structure or the novelty. And they're most fun people, because if you do understand what it is that they're going through, then, you know, it makes it easier to kind of talk to them about these things. So yeah, good girl. I think we'll end that here, and I think I said everything I said that I can say for now. But yeah, thanks for listening. Ciao. Bye.